Ingrid Solberg had been a widow for 3 days before she ever met her husband. That was what she believed on the morning of the 11th of October in 1887, when the small Concorde stagecoach that had carried her, the last leg of her journey from the Northern Pacific railhead in Missoula, came around the long pine-shouldered bend of the Upper Bitterroot Road, and the driver pulled back on the lines, and the team slowed to a walk on the soft gravel of the lane. And below them, set in a small, clean hollow between 2 stands of dark larch on the west bank of the Bitterroot River in Montana Territory, was a small one-room hand-notched log cabin with a thin, clean rope of smoke rising from the iron stove chimney into the pale autumn sky. She had folded the telegram into the front of her traveling Bible 9 days back, in the freight office at the rail depot in St. Paul, and she had not unfolded it since. She did not need to. The words were already in her. The 4 short lines in the abbreviated way of telegrams, the date at the top, the signature of a Bitterroot Valley physician she had never met, the small handwritten stamp of the Western Union office in the town of Hamilton, Montana Territory. Regret to inform. Newt H. deceased of exposure. Found Wednesday morning. North Ridge. Will hold remains until arrival or instruction. Dr. P. Trever, Hamilton Mountain. 3 days, the date said. 3 days before she had stepped onto the eastbound platform at the small Lutheran railhead in Glenwood, Minnesota, with 1 cardboard trunk and her late mother's small wool shawl folded over her arm, the telegram had come into the freight office in St. Paul at 4:30 in the afternoon on the 2nd of October. The agency in St. Paul had held it for her. She had read it at the freight counter, standing up. She had not sat down. She had not cried in the office. She had decided, standing at that counter, that she would go on west all the same. She had 3 reasons. The first was that she had paid her $36 to the Northern Lutheran Bride Society in Minneapolis in August, and the money was not refundable. The second was that her oldest brother in Glenwood had married in September, and his new wife did not want a sister-in-law in the house, and Ingrid had no place to walk back to. The third was the only one that mattered, though she did not admit it to herself until the train was past Bismarck. She had been writing to the man for 7 months, 2 letters a month, 14 in all, and she wanted to see the place he had described to her in the letters before somebody else took it. So she had ridden the Northern Pacific to Missoula. She had hired the Concord from Missoula to Hamilton. She had presented herself at the office of Dr. P. Trever on the morning of the 10th of October, a thin sunburned man of 61 with iron-gray hair and watery pale blue eyes behind small steel-rimmed spectacles, and she had said, "I am Ingrid Solberg. I have come about Mr. Newt." The doctor had stared at her for a long moment. He had set down his pen. He had said, very carefully, "Miss Solberg, you did not turn back." "No, sir. I did not expect you would come. I am here, doctor. I see you are." She had asked to see the grave. The doctor had looked at the floorboards of his office. He had looked at the cold iron stove in the corner. He had looked back at her, and he had said, "Miss Solberg, there is no grave. No grave. Sit down, please. I would rather stand. Sit down, Miss Solberg. I owe you a longer answer than I can give you on your feet." She had sat. The doctor had sat across from her, and he had taken off his small steel-rimmed spectacles, and he had polished them slowly with a square of cream linen from his vest pocket. And he had said, "On the 29th of September, I rode up to the Newt cabin on the river, because Halvor Newt had not come into Hamilton for 2 weeks, and that was unlike him. The cabin door was open. The stove was cold. There were boot tracks going up the north ridge through 3 inches of fresh September snow, and no tracks coming back. I followed those tracks 2 miles up the ridge. I found his rifle in his coat under the talus shelf at the rim. I found no body. The wolves had been in the country that week. I rode back to Hamilton. I telegraphed your agency on the 2nd of October on the assumption that I had seen as much as I was going to see. Miss Solberg, I sent the telegram before I had found the body. Doctor, on the morning of the 7th, he walked into Hamilton on his own feet. He had gone over the rim chasing a wounded elk. He had broken his right ankle. He had lain 3 nights in a rock crack with the buffalo robe from his pack and a small fire and his rifle as a splint. And he had come down on the 4th morning at first light when the snow softened, and he had walked the 11 miles into Hamilton with a green willow crutch, and he had walked into my office on the 7th of October at 4 in the afternoon, and I had to tell him I had buried him in my own handwriting 5 days before. He is alive. He is alive, Miss Solberg. He is at the cabin on the river. He has been there since the 8th. She had not spoken for perhaps 20 seconds. She had looked at the iron stove in the corner of the office. She had looked at the small framed photograph of the doctor's late wife on the wall behind his desk. A slim, gray-eyed woman with her hair in a tight bun. She had looked at her own folded gloves on her lap, and she had said, "Does he know?" Does he know what, Miss Solberg? Does he know I am here? Does he know the telegram went out? Does he know the agency forwarded it? Does he know I read it in St. Paul on the 2nd of October, standing at a freight counter, and got on the train all the same? The doctor had folded his linen square back into his vest pocket. He had set his small steel-rimmed spectacles back on his nose. He had said, very slowly, "Miss Solberg, I did not write him to say you were still coming. I assumed when the telegram went out from this office that the agency would put a halt to your travel. I have not seen him since the 7th. I did not know you were on the Concorde this morning until you came through that door." He doesn't know. He does not. Then he thinks I turned back. He does, Miss Solberg. I imagine he does. She had stood. She had pulled on her gloves. She had picked up her small, worn cardboard trunk by its leather handle, and she had said, "Doctor." "Yes, Miss Solberg." "Is there a Concord up the valley today?" "The mail rider goes up at noon. He carries 1 passenger if the road is dry." "Is it dry?" "It is dry. Miss Solberg, I would ask you to consider." "Consider what, doctor?" "He has been dead in his own mind for 9 days. He has been told you would not come because of a telegram he did not send. He is not going to expect the sound of a wagon coming up his lane this afternoon. I would ask you to consider letting me ride up with you." "No, sir." "Miss Solberg." "No, sir, doctor. He has been told he is dead for 9 days. He doesn't need a second man on the porch when he finds out he is alive." The doctor had looked at her a long moment. He had nodded once. He had said, "I will send word to the mail rider to wait for you. The Concord office is across the square." "Thank you, doctor." "Miss Solberg." "Yes." "I am sorry I sent the telegram." "Doctor, you did what a careful man does. You sent it because you did not want me to come west to a body. I would have done the same in your office." "You are a kind woman, Miss Solberg." "I am a tired one. Good morning, doctor." She had walked out of his office into the bright, high-altitude sun of the Bitterroot Valley at noon, and she had crossed the square to the Concord stagecoach office, and the mail rider, a quiet young man of perhaps 19 named Eldon Crow, had loaded her cardboard trunk into the boot without comment, and he had handed her up to the seat beside him on the open box, and he had clucked to the 2 gray mules, and they had set off up the river road. He had said 2 sentences in the 4 hours it had taken to climb the road to the Newt place, and one of them had been, "Watch the loose gravel on the switchback above the second creek," and the other had been, "I'll wait at the river ford if you change your mind." She had not changed her mind. Now the Concorde was at the bottom of the lane. The mail rider had set the brake. He had climbed down. He had walked around to her side of the box, and he had held up his hand to help her down. And she had taken his hand for the half-second she needed, and she had stepped onto the gravel of the lane, and she had said, "Mr. Crow." "Ma'am." "You can leave the trunk on the porch step. I will not need it carried inside." "Ma'am, I'll wait at the river ford. I won't go further than the ford until the sun's behind the western ridge. If the porch step is empty when I look back up the lane in 2 hours, I'll come up. If your trunk has gone off the step, I'll know it's where it should be, and I'll drive on back to Hamilton." "Thank you, Mr. Crow." "Ma'am." He had set the cardboard trunk on the porch step. He had touched the brim of his hat. He had climbed back on the box, and he had clucked to the mules, and the Concorde had moved off down the lane toward the river ford, and the soft autumn wind moved in the larch boughs above the cabin, and Ingrid Solberg stood on the gravel at the foot of the porch step beside her 1 cardboard trunk, and her late mother's small wool shawl, and her traveling Bible with the folded telegram inside it, and the rope of smoke from the iron stove chimney went on rising, steady and quiet, into the pale October sky. The cabin door was closed. Inside her traveling cape, she felt, for the first time since the freight counter in St. Paul, the small, clean weight of the truth she had carried west. He is alive. He is on the other side of that door, and he is alive, and he believes I am sitting in Minnesota beside my brother's new wife, reading the telegram from a doctor he has never met, and he does not know I came on west. That was the first turning. She would name it later in her own mind. I came up the lane because I had already paid the fare for the woman I would be on the other side of that door. She did not turn around. She climbed the porch step. She did not knock. She did not, in that moment, know how to knock on a door behind which she expected to find her own husband alive after she had buried him for 9 days. She rested her gloved knuckles against the cold, rough boards of the door, and she stood with her forehead almost touching the wood, and she breathed once, and she breathed twice, and then she pressed the latch, and she pushed the door open. He was at the small iron stove on the far wall of the cabin. He had his back to the door. He was bare-chested in the cool autumn air, the sharp visible six-pack across his belly, a long, deep diagonal scar running from his right collarbone down to his sternum, his shoulder-length dark brown hair tied back with a leather cord, and below the belt he was wearing dark brown buckskin trousers buttoned at the waist and held up by a wide tooled leather belt with a brass buckle. The trousers tucked into knee-high brown leather boots tightly laced over the trouser legs, every part of his lower body fully covered. His right ankle was wrapped in a thick cream linen bandage above the boot. He had a green willow crutch leaned against the wall by the stove. He was stirring a small cast-iron pot. He turned at the sound of the door. He saw her. He did not drop the wooden spoon. He did not move toward her. His hand on the spoon went very still, and the spoon stayed in the pot, and his pale blue eyes, calm and steady and as exhausted as any eyes she had ever seen, went from her face to her cardboard trunk on the porch step behind her and back to her face. And he said, in a voice that was so quiet she barely heard it across the cabin. "Miss Solberg, Mr. Knut, you came. I came. The doctor. He told me this morning, Mr. Knut. He told me at his office. He told me he had not written to you yet. He has not. No, sir. You came up the lane not knowing. I came up the lane knowing, Mr. Knut. I knew when I left Hamilton at noon. You came up. I came up." She watched him then, and she would name this moment in her own mind later as the second turning, the turning of the cabin door. "I came in through the door because that was the door, and there was not going to be another one." She did not step further into the room. She stood on the threshold with the open door behind her and the cool autumn air moving across her shoulders. He took the spoon out of the pot. He set it on the small flat iron above the stove. He took the green willow crutch in his right hand and he set it under his right armpit, and he turned the full way around toward her, and he stood with his weight on his good left leg and his right ankle a few inches off the floorboards, and he said, "Miss Solberg, I owe you about 30 things. I am going to say them in the wrong order." "All right. First, sit down. I can stand. Sit down, Miss Solberg. There is a chair by the table. Sit, please." She sat. She kept her gloves on. She kept her bonnet tied. She kept her traveling cape buttoned. She rested her hands on her lap and she watched him. "Second," he said, "I have been on this floor for 10 days. I am not steady on this ankle yet. If I sit down with you at the table, I am going to have to use the crutch to get back up, and that is going to slow the saying of these 30 things by 10 or 15 seconds each. So I am going to stand. Stand. Third, the doctor was right to write that telegram. I would have written it from his office. I was 16 hours overdue when he rode up to the cabin, and I was 3 nights overdue when he gave up. He gave up on the right day. Yes, sir. Fourth, I have read every one of your 14 letters 17 times. I have read the September 1 22 times. They are in the tin box at the head of the bed. I would like you to know they are there before I say anything else. All right. Fifth, I did not write you a 15th letter from the rock crack on the North Ridge. I am sorry for that. Mr. Knut. Sixth, the reason I did not write you a 15th letter from the rock crack is that I did not have a pencil. I have decided in the last 3 nights that this is the only excuse I will ever offer for not writing you a letter, and that going forward I will carry a pencil and a small folded paper in the inside pocket of my coat at all times, so that this excuse never comes up again. She felt something move under her breastbone that she had not expected. It was not laughter. It was something close to it. She held it back. Seventh, yes. I did not expect you to come on west after the telegram. I told the doctor on the 7th of October that I expected the agency would put a halt to your travel. I told the doctor that I would write you a letter myself in November, when I could write again with my right hand, and that I would offer to release you from the agreement, and that I would expect you to take the release. You expected I would take the release. I expected, Miss Solberg, that a woman in Minnesota who had read a telegram on a freight counter in St. Paul about a man dying of exposure on a ridge would not get back on the train. I expected that of you, and I would have expected it of any woman, and I owe you an apology for that. For expecting it. For expecting it. I have been told once today already that I expected the wrong thing. By whom? By me, about 30 minutes ago, when the dust came up on the lane and I went to the window. You saw the wagon. I saw the wagon. I did not know it was you. I thought perhaps Dr. Trevor coming up with the mail rider to tell me he had been wrong about the body. The elk's body, that is, the body of the wounded elk I had been chasing. Or the boy from the Hamilton store with the November order of coffee and salt. I did not think it was you, Miss Solberg, because I had told myself for 3 days that it could not be you. Now you know. Now I know. She watched him a long moment. He did not move from the stove. He did not lean further on the crutch than he needed to. He kept his eyes on her face. Mr. Newt. Yes, ma'am. Eighth. Eighth what? Eighth thing you owe me. You said about 30. He did look at her then. His pale blue eyes, which had been on her face the whole time without varying, held there for a long, quiet moment, and he said, Miss Solberg, eighth is that I owe you the truth that I have been writing you those 14 letters for 7 months because I have been alone in this cabin for 8 years, and that the woman in the September letter, that is, the woman I described in the September letter as being the kind of woman I had been writing toward when I first wrote the agency, that woman was already you in my head a long time before I knew your name, and that finding out I had been telegraphed dead, and that you were sitting in Minnesota reading the news of it was the longest 3 days I have spent in this country, and that I am, Miss Solberg, very glad to be looking at your face. The cabin was quiet. She did not say anything for a long minute. She listened to the small iron stove ticking. She heard a single magpie on the porch rail outside. She heard the soft wind moving in the larch boughs above the cabin, and she heard the small, clean sound of the river running in the hollow below the lane. Then she said, very quietly, Mr. Newt. Yes. Take the pot off the stove. The bottom is going to scorch. He moved. He pivoted on the crutch. He took the small cast-iron pot off the stove with his bare left hand, wrapped in a folded square of cream cotton, and he set the pot on the flat iron, and he turned back to her, and he said, Miss Solberg. Yes. Would you like coffee? Yes. There is a tin cup on the second shelf. I cannot reach the second shelf right now without the crutch. Would you take down 2? Yes. She took down 2 tin cups. She set them on the small kitchen table. He poured the coffee from the small black pot on the back of the stove. He set the pot back. He took up the green willow crutch, and he came across to the table on the crutch, and he eased himself down onto the chair opposite hers, and he set the crutch leaning against the table edge, and he wrapped both his hands around his tin cup of coffee, and he watched her. Mr. Canute. Halvar. Halvar. Ingrid. Yes. You came up the lane knowing. I did. Why? Because I had read 14 letters from a man I had never met, Halvar, and I had been writing back to him in the same careful, slow hand for 7 months, and I had paid $36 to the Lutheran Bride Society in August, and my brother in Glenwood had married in September, and his wife did not want me in the house. And the telegram came on the 2nd of October, and I read it standing up at the freight counter in St. Paul, and I did not sit down. I did not have any place to sit down to. I got on the train. By the time the train was past Bismarck, I had decided that I would come on west and find the grave and stand at it for 1 full day, and then take the eastbound back to St. Paul. And by the time the train was past the Belt Mountains, I had decided that I would come on west and find the grave and stand at it for 1 full day, and then stay in Hamilton through the winter and take work as a seamstress. And by the time the Concord came around the bend on this lane, and I saw the smoke from the chimney, I had decided. She stopped. You had decided. I had decided that whether the smoke was a stranger's smoke or your smoke, I was going to walk up that porch step. Ingrid. Yes. You did not know it was my smoke. I did not. You walked up the porch step anyway. I walked up the porch step anyway. That was a brave thing. It was a tired thing. I have come to think, since the train left Bismarck, that bravery and tiredness look very similar in a woman who has run out of other doors. He did not say anything to that. He turned his tin cup of coffee a quarter turn in his hands, and he watched the steam come off the surface of it, and after a long, quiet moment, he said, I have not slept more than 2 hours together in 3 nights. Halvar, yes. You have to sleep. I will. You have to sleep tonight. I will, Ingrid. Where do you sleep? He gestured with his chin toward the small, hand-built bed against the north wall under a clean cotton quilt. There, he said. There is one bed, Ingrid. I will sleep on the floor. The bed is yours. Halvar. Yes. The floor will not heal your ankle. My ankle will heal where it heals. The floor will not heal your ankle, Halvar. The floor is for a man whose body is whole. You sleep in the bed. I will sleep on the floor. Ingrid Zolberg. Halvar Knute. No. Yes. No, Ingrid. Listen. There is no woman who has come up this lane on a Concord stage 3 days after she was told her husband was dead, who is going to lie on this cabin floor tonight. Then we will have a different arrangement. What arrangement? You sleep in the bed. The bed is wide enough for 2 if one of them keeps to her side of it. I will keep to my side of it. I will sleep on the half closest to the door so I can get up in the night and bank the stove. You will sleep on the half closest to the wall. He looked at her. Ingrid. Yes. That is not the way a man and a woman who have just met sleep. Halvar, you and I have been writing letters since March. We have not just met. That is true. And you are injured. That is true. And the floor will not heal your ankle. And you have not slept 3 nights. And there is 1 quilt in this cabin. And the cabin is not warm enough at 4 in the morning to put a man with a broken ankle on the floor under 1 blanket. The arrangement is settled, Halvar. I am settling it. He looked at her a long moment. He set down his tin cup. He nodded once, very slowly. He said, Yes, ma'am. Don't ma'am me. Yes, Ingrid. That is better. That was the 3rd turning, and she did name it for herself in that moment. I settled an arrangement at a kitchen table with a man I had buried for 9 days, and the settling did not feel like a settling. It felt like a door closing on a long corridor I had been walking in for 7 months. He did sleep. He slept that night, and the next, and the night after that. She lay on her half of the bed under her half of the clean cotton quilt, with her back to the cabin's east wall, and her shawl folded under her head as a pillow. And he lay on his half with his right ankle propped on the rolled-up canvas bag that held his August stack of pelts, and they did not touch in the dark, and they did not speak after she banked the stove. And on the 3rd morning, she woke at first light to find that he had got up before her on the green willow crutch, and had banked the stove himself, and had set water boiling for coffee, and had laid 2 tin cups on the table. Halvar, you slept. I slept. You slept 7 hours. How do you know? I have been awake for 1 of them. I have been listening to you breathe. Halvar Knut. I have been listening to make sure it was real, Ingrid. I have been told 3 times in 9 days that something I expected was real, and it was not. It is real. I know. Drink your coffee. Yes. She wrote to her brother in Glenwood that afternoon at the small writing desk by the kitchen window. She wrote 3 lines. She did not ask his wife's leave to write. She wrote, "The man is alive. The doctor was wrong. I have decided to stay through the winter and decide in the spring. She folded the letter into a single sheet. She set it aside for the mail rider to take down on his next run to Hamilton. The first week she learned where the well was and how to bank the iron stove at midnight and how to read the small wooden weather stick that hung from a nail outside the door. The second week she took down the bandage on his right ankle and she replaced it with a fresh strip of clean cream linen torn from one of her own traveling petticoats. And she did this every third day for 6 weeks until the bandage was no longer needed. And on each of those mornings, Halvar Knut sat very still on the chair by the kitchen table, with his bare right foot held out toward her on a low pine stool. And he watched her hands and not her face the way a careful man does when he is not yet ready to be looked at in return. If you have ever read a telegram standing up at a freight counter and got on the train anyway, subscribe to Ridge and Vow. We tell these slow, careful stories about the women who walk up a lane not knowing whose smoke is in the chimney. In the third week, he showed her the tin box at the head of the bed. He sat up on the edge of the bed in the morning with his right leg straight out in front of him on a folded gray wool blanket, and he reached behind the bedpost, and he brought out a small, flat-sealed tin box the size of a Bible, and he set it on the quilt between them, and he said, "Ingrid, yes, your 14 letters are in here, all right? I have read each of them more times than I want to tell you, all right? I have read the September 1 22 times. I have read the April 115. I have read the very first one, the one you wrote in March, the one that started, Mr. Newt. I have been given your name by the Lutheran Brides Society, and I will be plain with you about what I am and what I am not. I have read that one 31 times. 31. 31. I am giving you the box because I would like you to know that there is no letter in this box I would not have you read if you were to take the lid off. All right. There is one piece of paper in the box that is not one of your letters. What is it? It is the telegram. I asked Dr. Triever to write out the telegram he had sent to St. Paul in his own hand, and to date it the 2nd of October. He did it on the 7th, when I came down off the ridge. I have kept it. I read it once a day. I would like you to know it is in there. Why do you read it once a day? Because, Ingrid Solberg, I would like to remember every day for the rest of this winter that there are men in the Bitterroot Valley who would not have lifted a pen to send that telegram, and that Phineas Triever is not one of them, and that you got on the train after reading it, and that I am, today, looking at you in the morning light of my own cabin window. She did not say anything. She put her hand on the lid of the tin box. She did not lift the lid. She said, "Halvar, yes, you can read the September one again tonight if you want to. Ingrid, yes, I would like that very much." She lifted her hand off the lid. He did not put the box back. He set it on the small writing desk by the kitchen window, where it stayed for the rest of that autumn and the whole of the winter and the spring that followed, with a single piece of dried mountain sage laid across the lid that she had brought back from a walk in the 2nd week. In the 4th week, he learned to walk without the green willow crutch. He stood up from the kitchen table one morning at first light, and he set his weight on his right ankle for the first time in 28 days. And he closed his pale blue eyes for one long second, the way a man closes his eyes against a single sharp pain he has been waiting for. And he opened them again, and he said, "Ingrid, Halvar, it will hold, you are sure." I am sure. I am going to walk to the door and back. Halvar, watch. He walked to the door. He turned. He walked back to the table. He did not limp. He did limp on the second step, but he hit it on the third. And by the fifth step, the limp was gone. And she watched him do it, and she did not say anything. There, he said. There, she said. I will walk down to the river this afternoon. I want to see the ford before the snow. I'll go with you. Yes. They walked down the lane that afternoon to the river ford, where the mail rider had said he would wait the day she came up. The river was running gray and cold and clean over the round, pale stones of the ford, and the larch boughs above the bank had gone the soft, particular yellow that larches go in the third week of October, and they stood together on the gravel bar above the ford, and Halvar Knut set his right hand at the small of her back and held it there for one long, quiet minute. And that was the first time he had set a hand on her in 18 days, and neither of them spoke. In the 5th week, the boy from the Hamilton store came up the lane on a small black pony with the November order, a sack of coffee, a sack of salt, a half-bolt of cream cotton flannel, a tin of sewing pins. He tipped his hat to Ingrid at the porch step. He said, "Mrs. Knut, ma'am." She did not correct him. She had not corrected anybody in the Bitterroot Valley who had called her Mrs. Knut in 6 weeks. She took the order. She paid him in coin from a small leather purse that Halvar had set on the writing desk on the first morning after the bed arrangement was settled, and had said belonged to her and not to him, and she signed the small printed receipt slip in her own hand. I, Solberg. And the boy looked at the slip, and he frowned at the slip, and he looked up at her, and she said, "It's all right. You can write Mrs. Knut in your ledger if it helps." "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Eldon, ma'am, same as the mail rider. We're cousins." "Eldon. Yes, ma'am. Tell Mr. Crow down at the Concord office that the trunk on the porch step is still where it should be." "Ma'am?" "He will know what I mean. Tell him." "Yes, ma'am." The boy rode back down the lane on the small black pony, and the November order went on to the second shelf of the cabin's small pantry, and Halvar Knut came to the porch with the green willow crutch he no longer needed in his right hand, and he set the crutch leaning against the porch rail, and he said, "Ingrid." "Yes." "You signed the receipt as Solberg." "I did." "Should you have?" "Halvar, the receipt belongs to a woman who has not been married yet." "All right. It would belong to a different woman in 2 months." "In 2 months?" "In 2 months, Halvar, if you ask." He looked at her a long moment. "Ingrid." "Yes." "I am asking now." "Halvar." "I am asking now. I will ask again on the porch in 2 months in front of a preacher, and we will have a chapel, and there is a Lutheran missionary who comes through Hamilton on the 2nd Tuesday of December, and we will have him say the words then. But I am asking now. Yes. Yes, you will marry me, or yes, you heard the question. Yes, I will marry you, Halvar. Yes. He stood very still. He looked at the green willow crutch leaning against the porch rail. He looked back at her. He set his right hand against the side of her face, the first time he had touched her face in any way, and he held it there for 1 long second, and he said, very quietly, "Ingrid." "Yes." 3 days ago, I was dead in my own mind. Today, a woman who read the telegram of my death has agreed to marry me on a porch on the Bitterroot River. I would like you to know that I am, this minute, the happiest man between the Mission Range and the Bitterroots, and that I do not consider this a small geography. She felt the slow, careful smile move into the corners of her mouth, and she did not try to stop it. She set her own hand over his hand on the side of her face, and she said, "Halvar Knut, you are still a tired man. Come inside. The coffee is on the stove." "Yes, Ingrid." The Lutheran missionary came through Hamilton on the second Tuesday of December. He was a small, white-haired man named Pastor Olaf Hagen, who had ridden the Northwest Circuit on the same dappled gray gelding for 31 years, and who had read the marriage vows in 3 languages. And on the morning of the 14th of December, a clear, cold day with a fresh inch of fine snow on the larch boughs above the cabin, he rode up the lane on the dappled gray, and he tipped his black hat to Ingrid on the porch step, and he said, "Miss Solberg, Pastor, I have come because Halvar Knute wrote to me in the 2nd week of November and asked me to come." "I know, Pastor. I posted the letter for him." "You posted it." "He had asked me to post it. He had written it the night I agreed." "Then you knew this morning was coming." "I knew the morning was coming, Pastor. I did not know it would be today. The letter said 2nd Tuesday of December, and I have been watching the lane for 3 days." "Is the bridegroom inside?" "He is, Pastor. He is at the stove. He has been at the stove since first light. He has been at the stove because he does not know what else to do with his hands this morning. That is the way of bridegrooms." "I expect it is." She had not changed out of her traveling clothes for the wedding. She had not wanted to. She wore the high-collared cream cotton blouse with the small pearl buttons buttoned to the throat that her mother had sewn for her on the Glenwood farm in 1885. The ankle-length midnight blue wool skirt she had ridden west in on the Northern Pacific. The dark wool stockings. The scuffed brown leather lace-up ankle boots. The dark blue wool traveling cape buttoned at her throat, reaching past her knees, and around her shoulders she wore her late mother's small, soft gray wool shawl, folded into a triangle with the long edge across her shoulders, and the point hanging down her back the way her mother had worn it in the kitchen at Glenwood every December morning of her childhood. In her hair, pinned just above her left ear, she wore a small dried sprig of mountain sage that Halvar Knut had laid on the lid of the tin box at the head of the bed in the 3rd week, and which she had taken down on the eve of the wedding and pressed between 2 clean pages of her traveling Bible the previous night. Halvar Knut came out of the cabin onto the porch when Pastor Hagen tied the dappled gray to the porch rail. He was bare-chested in the cold December air, the sharp visible six-pack across his belly, the long deep diagonal scar from his right collarbone down to his sternum, catching the cold pale December light, his shoulder-length dark brown hair tied back with a leather cord, his full thick dark beard combed careful, his pale blue eyes calm and steady on her face. And below the belt he wore dark brown buckskin trousers buttoned at the waist and held up by a wide tooled leather belt with a brass buckle, the trousers tucked into knee-high brown leather boots tightly laced over the trouser legs, every part of his lower body fully covered, and over his left forearm he carried a clean white cotton shirt folded once, which he would put on for the ceremony itself at the pastor's word, and which he would take off again the moment the pastor had ridden back down the lane. Pastor Hagen looked at the white cotton shirt over Halvar's forearm. He looked at the cold December air. He looked at the bare chest of the bridegroom. He did not, evidently, find any of it surprising. "Halvar Knut," he said, "Pastor, will you put on the shirt for the words?" "I will, Pastor. Ingrid asked me to." "Then I will read the vows." He put on the white cotton shirt. He buttoned it slowly and carefully, and he tucked it carefully into the belt. He took Ingrid's right hand in his right hand, and he turned her toward the pastor, and the pastor stood on the gravel of the lane in front of the porch step in the cold, pale December morning light, and the dappled gray shifted its weight on its picket rope, and Pastor Olaf Hagen read the vows in his small, careful voice with the slow, careful Norwegian Lutheran cadence he had used on the Northwest Circuit for 31 years. When the pastor asked Halvar whether he would have her, Halvar said, "I will. I would have had her the morning she came up the lane." When the pastor asked Ingrid whether she would have him, Ingrid said, "I have. I have had him since the 2nd of October at the freight counter in St. Paul." Pastor Olaf Hagen lifted his eyes from his prayer book. He looked at the two of them on the porch step. He nodded slowly. He said, "Then that will do, Mrs. Knut, Mr. Knut. That is all the Lutheran Church has ever asked of a man and a woman on a porch." "Pastor?" "Yes, Mr. Knut." "Will you take dinner with us before you ride back?" "I will, Mr. Knut. I have ridden 11 miles this morning, and I have not eaten since first light." They took dinner in the cabin. Halvar Knute took off the white cotton shirt the minute the pastor stepped through the cabin door, and he laid it carefully across the back of the kitchen chair, and Pastor Hagen did not look up from his plate when the shirt came off. He ate the venison stew that had been simmering on the stove all morning. He drank 2 tin cups of coffee. He told a story about a wedding he had performed in 1872 in a snowstorm in the Mission Range, where the bridegroom had been an Irishman and the bride had been a Crow woman, and the only word they had shared between them had been the word yes, which had been enough, the pastor said, for the Lutheran Church, and which had been enough for the marriage besides, because that marriage was now in its 16th year, and the couple had 6 children and a cabin twice the size of this one in the Mission foothills. Halvar walked the pastor down to the lane after dinner. He held the bridle of the dappled gray while the pastor mounted. The pastor looked down at Ingrid on the porch step, and he said, "Mrs. Knut, Pastor, I will come back on the 2nd Tuesday of December next year. If you have a child to be baptized by, then I will baptize it. If you do not, I will take coffee. We will have coffee for you either way, Pastor. That is the right answer." He rode the dappled gray down the lane in the cold, pale December afternoon, and he disappeared around the long, pine-shouldered bend, and the soft autumn wind that had become the soft winter wind moved in the larch boughs above the cabin, and Halvar Knut came up the porch step, and he set his right hand against the side of Ingrid's face, the way he had set it the day she had agreed, and he said, "Mrs. Knut, Mr. Knut, come inside." "Yes." The first year went by quickly. There are parts of a marriage that do not belong on a porch, even a porch a woman has stood on while her husband was being read his vows by a Lutheran missionary in a white cotton shirt. They learned each other slowly. He had been alone in the cabin for 8 years, and there were things he did not know how to share that he was learning to share. And she had been alone in her brother's house for 2 months and at her own writing desk in Glenwood for the 7 months before that, and there were things she did not know how to receive that she was learning to receive. And the snow came up the lane in heavy December, and the snow stayed on the larch boughs through February, and the river ran clean and gray and cold under 3 inches of clear ice all winter. And in the 2nd week of March, the ice broke on the river ford in a single afternoon, and they walked down to watch it. In the 2nd week of April, Halvar Knut rode the small chestnut mare named Penny down to Hamilton on a Saturday morning, and he came home in the afternoon with a small flat-sealed envelope addressed to Mrs. H. Knut, care of Knut Ranch, Upper Bitterroot, Montana Territory, in a hand Ingrid did not recognize. She opened it on the porch. The letter inside was from Dr. Phineas Triever. It said, in his small, careful physician's handwriting, "Mrs. Knut, I have been thinking of you all winter. I would like to know how the ankle has healed and how the household has fared, and whether you would forgive an old man for a telegram he sent in the wrong week of October. P. Triever." She wrote back that afternoon at the small writing desk by the kitchen window. She wrote, "Doctor, the ankle has healed clean. The household has fared well. The telegram was the right telegram on the 2nd of October. Come up the lane any Tuesday this summer. There is always coffee. Mrs. H. Knut." She folded the letter. She set it aside for the mail rider. She turned in her chair. Halvor Knute was at the iron stove with his back to her, bare-chested, the sharp, visible six-pack across his belly, the long, deep diagonal scar across his chest, the dark brown buckskin trousers and the wide tooled leather belt with the brass buckle, and the knee-high brown leather boots tightly laced over the trouser legs, and she watched the line of his shoulders, and she said, "Halvor." "Yes," Dr. Triever wrote. "Did he? He apologized for the telegram. Did he? I told him the telegram was the right telegram on the 2nd of October. He turned. He looked at her over his shoulder. He looked at the folded letter on the writing desk. He looked back at her face. He said, "Was it? Halvor." "Yes." If he had not sent that telegram on the 2nd of October, I would have come west on the eastbound that left St. Paul on the 3rd instead of the 2nd. And I would have arrived at Hamilton on the morning of the 10th of October instead of the morning of the 9th, because the eastbound on the 3rd broke an axle east of Bismarck and lay over half a day. I read the schedule at the freight counter in St. Paul before I left. I have read it many times since. Ingrid, you would have come down off the ridge on the 7th, and Dr. Triever would have written you on the 8th that the telegram had been a mistake, and you would have written me in Glenwood on the 9th, releasing me from the agreement, and I would have got the release at Glenwood on the 17th, and I would never have come west. Halvor. The telegram on the 2nd of October was the reason I left St. Paul on the 2nd of October instead of waiting for the 3rd. The telegram was the right telegram. Ingrid. It was the right telegram. The doctor sent the right one. He did not know it, but he did. He set down the wooden spoon. He came across the cabin to the writing desk on his good ankles. He stood behind her chair. He set his hands on the top rail of the chair on either side of her shoulders. He bent his head down until his forehead rested at the crown of her hair, and he said, "Ingrid Solberg Knute. Yes. I have been a man who is hard to write a letter to. Yes. You wrote me 14 anyway, the first one in March, the 14th in September. And then on the 2nd of October, you read a telegram of my death, and you got on the train, and the train was the 15th letter. Halvor. It was the 15th letter. It said, I am still coming, and you cannot stop me by being dead. And the train arrived on the 9th, and the porch step on the 11th, and you walked up the porch step, not knowing whose smoke was in the chimney. And that walking up was the 16th letter. I want you to know I have counted the letters, Ingrid. There were 16, not 14. The last two were the longest. Halvor. Yes. There will be a 17th in October. In October. In October. Halvor. The midwife in Hamilton said the 2nd week. He was very still for a long moment. He did not lift his forehead from the crown of her hair. The cabin was quiet. The iron stove ticked. The chestnut mare in the corral lifted her head and put it back down. The small bone-handled letter opener on the writing desk lay parallel to her folded letter to the doctor. Ingrid. Yes. The second week of October. The second week. That is 6 months. 6 months, Halvar. That is 1 month past the first anniversary of when the telegram came. It is. I am going to be a careful man this summer. I know. I am going to carry a pencil in the inside pocket of my coat every time I leave the cabin. You have been carrying one since November. I know. I have checked. You have checked. Every coat, every morning. Ingrid Knute. Halvar Knut. He lifted his forehead from the crown of her hair. He turned her chair toward him without lifting her out of it. He went down on his good ankle, then the other, and he knelt on the cabin floor in front of her chair, and he set both of his hands flat on her lap with his pale blue eyes, calm and exhausted and steady, on her face. And he said, Ingrid Knute, this child is going to be the 17th letter, and the 17th letter is going to know that the 2nd of October of 1887 was the day his mother got on a train in St. Paul and rode west to a man she had buried for 9 days, and that she came up his lane in a Concord stage on the morning of the 11th of October, not knowing whose smoke was in the chimney, and that she walked up the porch step anyway. I want him to know that, Ingrid. I want him to know that on his first day. He will know. Will he? On the first day, Halvar, I will say it the way I have just said it to you. Ingrid. Yes. Say it again now, so I can hear the way you will say it to him. All right. She set her hand against the side of his face. She kept her hand there. She said, slowly and very quietly, Your father was a man who was hard to write a letter to. I wrote him 14 anyway, from March of 1887 to September of 1887. On the 2nd of October, I read the telegram of his death at a freight counter in St. Paul, and I got on the train. The train was the 15th letter. I came up the lane on the 11th of October, not knowing whose smoke was in the chimney. I walked up the porch step. The porch step was the 16th letter. You, my little one, are the 17th. There will be more after you. There will be a great many more. Your father is mailing them now. The cabin was quiet. After a long moment, Halvar Knute lifted his right hand off her lap, and he wiped the corner of his right eye with the back of his wrist, very quickly, the way a man does who has not let any other person see him do this in a long time. And he said, Ingrid Solberg Knut. Yes, I am mailing them now. You are. On the 1st of every month. On the 1st of every month, Halvar. To your brother in Glenwood. He has a wife who will read them at the kitchen table to her own mother, and her mother will write back. They are my family. They are your family now. They are. Halvar. Yes. Help me up. The bottom of the coffee pot is going to scorch. He laughed once, the first time she had heard him laugh in 7 months, and the first time she had heard him laugh since the day he had come back from the ridge. And he helped her up out of the chair, and they walked together to the iron stove. And he took the small black pot off the stove with his bare left hand, wrapped in a folded square of cream cotton, and he set the pot on the flat iron, and the cabin smelled of coffee and cold pine smoke and the soft dry sage that had hung from the rafter all winter. If you have been reading these words and thinking about the woman in your own life who once read a piece of news that flattened her and got back up on her feet anyway, subscribe to Ridge and Vow. We tell these stories because some women walk up a lane not knowing whose smoke is in the chimney and choose to climb the porch step all the same. We post one of these every Friday at sunrise. We would like you in the listening room. It is 1 year now since the wedding on the porch step. The bitter root is quiet in the cool October dawn. The larch boughs above the cabin have just begun to turn the soft, particular yellow. They go in the 3rd week of October. The river runs gray and clean and cold over the round, pale stones of the ford a 1/4 mile down the lane. And the chestnut mare named Penny is grazing on the south slope, where the late grass is best, and the small tin box at the head of the bed, which used to hold 14 letters and which used to be the size of a Bible, has been replaced by a larger hand-cut pine box that Halvor Knut built in February on the long winter evenings while she sewed by the lamp. And the new box is lined with cedar, and it holds 22 letters now. The original 14 plus the 8 letters Halvor Knut has written and mailed to her brother in Glenwood on the 1st of every month since the wedding. And on the lid of the box, pinned under a small, flat round of pine, is a single yellow telegram in the careful physician's hand of Dr. Phineas Triever. Regret to inform. Newt H., deceased of exposure, found Wednesday morning, North Ridge, will hold remains until arrival or instruction. Dr. P. Triever Hamilton Mount, folded once, pressed flat, kept. She is sitting on the porch step in the small, soft gray wool shawl her mother wore at Glenwood, with her right hand resting on the small, soft round of her belly under the high-collared cream cotton blouse and the midnight blue wool skirt, and Halvor Knut is in the cabin yard at the wide pine round with the long-handled axe splitting kindling for the morning fire. He is bare-chested in the cool October dawn, the sharp visible six-pack across his belly, the long, deep diagonal scar from his right collarbone to his sternum, catching the soft, pale amber light, the dark brown buckskin trousers buttoned at the waist with the wide tooled leather belt and the brass buckle, the trousers tucked into the knee-high brown leather boots tightly laced over the trouser legs, every part of his lower body fully covered, the wide-brim brown leather hat hung on the porch nail behind her where he hangs it every morning. Between his strokes he stops and he turns his head and he looks at her on the porch step, and he does not smile because he is not, by nature, a man who smiles, but the corners of his pale blue eyes lift in the way they have learned to lift this last year, and Ingrid lifts hers back, and the steam rises off her tin cup of coffee on the porch rail beside her. The mail rider comes up the lane at noon every Tuesday now. He carries the December letters down to Hamilton, and he brings up the replies. He had not stopped to wait at the river ford in over a year. He had stopped waiting on the 11th of October of 1887, when he looked back up the lane at the end of his 2 hours, and the porch step had been empty of the cardboard trunk, and he had clucked to the gray mules, and he had driven down the river road to Hamilton with the news. There is a saying in the Bitterroot Valley. It belongs to Dr. Phineas Triever, who has ridden up the lane on his sorrel gelding 12 times in the last 12 months, on the 2nd Tuesday of every month, to drink coffee on the porch, and to apologize once more for the telegram that he sent in the wrong week of October, and to be told once more by Ingrid Knute on the porch step that he sent the right telegram on the right day, and to ride home down the river road in the cool blue evening, shaking his iron-gray head. The saying is this: a man in the high country can be buried by a careful physician in the morning and walk down off the ridge on his own feet in the afternoon. And the only difference between the two is whether anybody got on a train when they read the news. The new letter on the writing desk by the kitchen window this morning is the September letter, the 33rd in the cedar-lined box, addressed in Halvar Knut's careful, slow hand to her brother in Glenwood, Minnesota. And it ends, as it always does, as the last 4 months have ended, with the same single sentence. Your sister and the boy that is coming are well, and the lane is quiet, and the coffee is on. H. He has been calling it the boy that is coming for 3 months. The midwife in Hamilton has not been able to tell him whether it is a boy. He has decided. The first stars will come up over the bitter roots in a few hours. The river will run gray and clean over the stones of the ford. The chestnut mare will sleep on her feet at the corral rail. The kindling will be split and stacked under the porch eave. The small tin cup of coffee on the porch rail will be empty before the sun goes behind the western ridge. And Halvar Knut will come up the porch step with his right hand on the small downy curl of hair just above her left ear, where the dried sprig of mountain sage has lived for a year, and he will set the wide-brim brown leather hat on the nail behind her, and he will sit down on the porch step beside her, and he will not say anything, and she will not say anything, and the porch step will be the third porch step they have sat on together this autumn without saying anything, and the sitting will be the 17th letter still being written. She thinks sometimes about the freight counter in St. Paul on the afternoon of the 2nd of October. She thinks about the 4 short lines of the telegram. She thinks about the eastbound train that she chose not to wait for. She thinks about the careful young man in the freight office who had handed her the telegram across the counter, and how he had not asked her whether she wanted to sit down, and how she had been grateful to him for that for a year now, and how she has come to think, this October, that the telegram was the right telegram on the 2nd of October, and that Dr. Phineas Trevor was the right physician to send it, and that the eastbound on the 3rd would have broken its axle east of Bismarck, and would have laid over half a day, and that the wagon would have come up the lane a day later than the one she came up on, and that the smoke from the iron stove chimney would not have been her smoke if she had waited. She did not wait. She read a telegram standing up at a freight counter in St. Paul on the 2nd of October of 1887. She got on the train. She arrived at the big Bitterroot Bend on the morning of the 11th in a Concord stage with 1 cardboard trunk and her mother's small wool shawl folded over her arm. She walked up the porch step of a cabin she had only seen in letters. She did not know whose smoke was in the chimney. She opened the door, and her husband, alive and bare-chested, and balanced on a green willow crutch by the small iron stove on the far wall, turned around at the sound of the door and said her name. And that is the way a woman buries a husband she has never met for 9 days, and walks up a porch step on the 10th and finds him at the stove with a green willow crutch and the coffee on. And that is the way a man who has been told he is dead for 3 days finds out he is alive on the morning of the 11th of October of 1887 in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana Territory. And that is the way the 17th letter gets written, day after day, on a porch step beside a quiet woman in a small gray wool shawl, by a quiet man who has decided to mail every letter from this October on, and to carry a pencil in the inside pocket of his coat for the rest of his natural life.